Hello and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri.
And Amy Cornell.
And super excited. So my book is the Amazon Author Formula Workbook is up on Amazon for pre-order. Super excited. The launch date for that book will be June 20th. And I'm thrilled that it's done. It always feels so good when the book, and we always talk about the fact that the work has just started when the book is up, up on Amazon, but it just feels really good to have this book up on Amazon. It's like, okay.
Right. Next phase, moving on to the fun stuff.
Yeah, moving on to the fun stuff. Yes, exactly. So we'll have some information on how to find the book in the show notes. You can always just search me on Amazon. There's not a lot of authors out there with the last name of Sansevieri, so it shouldn't be that hard to find. So the inspiration for this show came from an article that I read that talked about rethinking your author career, I guess, for lack of a better term, and rethinking your first book, right? Mm-hmm. Because in the majority of cases, your first book isn't an instant ticket to fame, Netflix deal, bestseller status. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you're listening to this and you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm already done with these two. This is going to be a total buzzkill. That's not what the show's about. This show is about rethinking the level of expectation that you put on your first book. And I cannot tell you, and I'm going to turn this over to Amy in a second because she has a really great story. I cannot tell you how many times I have talked to authors who literally are discouraged because their first book didn't do as well as they expected. And maybe their expectations were misaligned. Maybe they weren't. But for whatever reason, it's not hitting the mark for them. And they are discouraged and deflated, and there's not a lot that I can do to correct that if they already feel like my book is terrible and this whole process has been a shit show and I don't really, you know what I mean?
Right. And if they're already down on the whole concept of marketing, as if marketing doesn't work either, it's like, oof,
Yeah. And so the problem with that is, and we've seen this also, is that a lot of really, really talented authors lose the thread with this kind of thinking.
Yep.
Right. So they lose the thread and they lose basically their entire career, and then they get bitter, and then they wind up in Amy's inbox really upset and mad. Sorry, I totally opened that door for you, Amy. Do you want to walk through and tell us your story?
Yes. And for what it's worth, it wasn't a great email exchange necessarily.
I know this is a really... Sorry.
No, it's okay, because sometimes the timing is just really impeccable because, things happen. Anybody that's listened for a while knows that pretty much 99% of our show ideas come from our experiences, Penny's conversations, you know what I mean? Like they're real life concepts that we try to put together somewhat intelligently to share with y'all. So, but yeah, this week someone showed up in my inbox, and the short version is that things just weren't working for his book. And so his email to us was essentially, I need you to sell more copies of my book. And of course, my response was, again, anybody listening could probably actually craft a pretty good Amy response at this point. If you're a dedicated listener, you've probably got a pretty good answer for him already. But, I say what I normally say, that we can't directly sell your book, but there are a lot of things we can do to improve your retail presence, your first impression, introducing you to the right people, things like that really do matter, because we talk about it. Everything you do is your resume. And if your resume is subpar, you're not going to see those conversions. That just doesn't work. So, I said that to him, and he responded. His next email back was very short. Well, then can you pitch me to agents or publishers? And I was like, listen, we've done a show. Hopefully most of you have caught it. If you haven't, we did a show on there are no shortcuts to success, this
Right.
is a prime example of like, you don't get around a book that is floundering for any reason by just then going like, you know what the answer is? Getting an agent. That's really not how that works. And it was so hard for me not to respond. I mean, I just left it at that point because, clearly this person is not in the right mindset, which is exactly how Penny led off this show for a reason. This person is in the wrong mindset. Nothing's working. He's already angry. And apparently, for whatever reason, it's our fault. And that's why he showed up at our front door to let
Right.
us know that he's upset and that we have to fix this. But even though I'm making light of it, it really is a perfect example of things aren't working, getting discouraged, emails start getting caustic, you start floundering for any scrap of potentially saving your book. And all of that is not going to lead you back on the right path to either fixing things or being better prepared for your next title,
Right. Exactly. And I think that, and just so y'all know, when Amy leaves the chat, like Amy has left the chat, then you know that you're probably on the wrong, you're probably on the wrong track. But I think that to realign your expectations, and which I think would have really helped if somebody had said that to this author, is use book one as a launch pad. And again, it doesn't mean that you don't want to pitch influencers and maybe even pitch media and all this other stuff. It's not that I'm not telling you not to do all the things. I am in fact telling you to do all the things, but as opposed to having every piece of, having a set of unrealistic goals tethered to all the things, I want you to pull back on your expectation level and just realize that you have to do it all because book one is a launch pad. It's a great opportunity to grow your email list. Oh my gosh. So many conversations with authors about you got to grow your email list. And I've talked to authors, and this makes me really sad for them. I've talked to authors who come to us after they've written 5 or 6 books and they've never even started or thought about growing an email list. And every book that you publish not only adds to your brand, adds to your library, adds to your bookshelf, but also adds to the number of readers that you potentially connect with. Connecting with readers and influencers, right? And focusing exclusively on the reader experience.
Yep.
I cannot tell you, and I will freely admit, 25 years ago when I wrote my first book, I was focused on the need, right? So, oh my gosh, there's such a need for this book. So my first book, Get Published Today, aside from the fiction book that I wrote, but my first book, Get Published Today, was really focused on this revolutionized print on demand industry, and it had to be told, and this book had to be written, and everybody had to hear about it. The problem was that it wasn't really speaking to the need of a reader because I was too far in the weeds, as I often am with some of these like I love to nerd out on stuff. But it also it wasn't connecting with the reader, right? So writing a book that connects with the reader, so your first book can really tell you, which mine did, whether or not you've connected with your reader, right? Because you'll get feedback or you won't, it'll just be crickets out there and you won't get any feedback. And then you'll know no feedback is also an answer, right? Um, Connecting with readers, connecting with influencers, and not only connecting with them, but building relationships with them. And then also, letting their feedback inform your career. Because in theory, every book that we write should be better than the previous book that we wrote.
Yes.
Right? Because we're getting better every time. I mean, your thoughts on this, Amy?
Yeah, no, I think, and just setting the tone, and instead of, like you said, instead of putting the pressure on this book
Right.
to tell you that it's worth it to keep going, like you said, Penny, putting the focus on doing all the things correctly. And then we talk about this a lot, but also in the right order.
Yeah.
Do things correctly and do them in the right order. And not only are you more likely to see more successes, incremental successes with your first book if you're focused on doing all the right things for your product, doing all the right things for your retail page, doing the right things for your brand, thinking about how you're going to connect with your readers, what this means for your reader, the reader experience. Going through things in that order is definitely setting you up for success. That is when things start clicking. But we see it all the time. If you're constantly getting distracted by these larger, more sexy goals, you're kind of just going through the motions with the other stuff and you're missing things. You're skipping things. You're saying, I'm not going to worry about my author central stuff right now because I'd really rather be pitching media. I need to find somebody to pitch me to media. I'll deal with that later. That is the wrong order to do things.
Right.
It's amazing how a few tweaks to your timeline and what you're doing. And your first book should also be a learning experience. Make it part of the educational learning experience, because again, like Penny said, every book you release should be getting better, but there's no reason not to set the bar super high the first time, right? Like, it doesn't mean just throw the first one out there and be like, well, there's only room to grow from here.
Right. Exactly. And I meant to lead with this, but Amy shared this great video this morning, and it was basically, I'm going to put it up on my Facebook page probably tomorrow or something, if you follow me there. But it was a lecture. It was a graduation speech rather, and the crux of the speech was choose your hard, right? It's all hard. Publishing a great book is hard. Publishing a bad book is hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Choose your hard.
Yep.
And I've had conversations with authors who'd show up, and it really bothers me when they're discouraged, because as an author myself, I don't like hearing other authors who are just discouraged, who hate the publishing industry, who think marketing sucks, who think we suck. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's a hard conversation to have. But it's also, and I'm going to use it to them. It's like, well, choose your hard. So having your expectations ridiculously high, not understanding the marketplace, not understanding that you have to pay your dues before you can get up to that next level, is also hard. But so is, being so discouraged that you shoot off angry emails to PR companies looking for, and you walk around like this angry ball of everybody hates me and my book, which is probably not true unless you're a jerk. And then maybe it is true, but choose your heart. And I thought that was just so brilliant. And it's so fitting.
I know.
For so many things in life.
It is. I know. I love that. I was like, oh my gosh, Penny, we could have so many of these. Publishing a book or marketing is hard, but having a book out there that doesn't go anywhere, that's also hard. So which version sounds better?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, like it's hard. Like we talked about this person that emailed me. He's in a hard spot right now. He's not doing well.
Yeah. But he's not doing well. And
but it's also, you could say it's hard to put in the effort and do things correctly and do them in the right order, but at least that's a productive version of hard,
Exactly. And I think that when you think about your first book can have success, right? Mm-hmm. But
sure. We see it all the time.
Oh, 10,000% we see it all the time. Absolutely. There's always, and some books just surprise the heck out of me. And by the way, we just surpassed Amy's 14-year anniversary. Amazing. And so in the 14 years that you've been doing this, you and I both know books surprise us all the time.
Right. And we have wins that we celebrate all the time. But I think to everything that we're saying right now, yes, we have big wins. We get to celebrate really big wins, which is always amazing. But when people say well, how successful are your campaigns? Sorry, now I'm doing a voice. That was rude. But truly, we get these questions all the time. And I let people know it's we see successful books all the time. But the way we frame it is what's successful for this author at this point in their career, for the platform they've developed up to this point, and for the fact that this is either their first, maybe second, whatever. You know what I mean? There's so many different factors. So it's like, when your expectations are appropriate for where you're at in your career, there are tons of wins to be had.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that when an author asks what does success look like for me, I mean, and let's say it's their first book, they don't, they're still building their website, whatever. Their success, their milestones might be growing their newsletter list, right? Maybe getting speaking gigs and podcast interviews and influencers talking about the book, and really establishing themselves as maybe it's a thought leader, or maybe it's maybe it's just a top tier true crime fiction writer or something like that. Reimagine what your success, what your mile markers are going to be for success. Because if your success is, I want to be on, I don't know, Dr. Phil, and somebody asked me about that just recently. I'm like, well, first off, Dr. Phil doesn't have a show anymore, but okay.
Right.
But everything else is going to be a big disappointment to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's not just about, all right, so your book is, don't build your house on sand. Make sure that your book is your platform and it helped, and all that stuff is great. But the other problem with misaligned expectations for first book, with no background, no this, no that, is that it just creates, everything else is just gone to shit. It creates a litany of disappointment. And
right.
So looking at what success really looks like for a book. I mean, look, if your first book, if you can grow your newsletter with your first book, and you can get influencers talking about your book, and maybe you do some local media, maybe you're doing book events, right? Or speaking gigs, if that's your thing, and podcast interviews, that's amazing. I think that's amazing.
It is amazing. Don't put retiring on that short list for your first book, right?
Right. I'm 50 years old. I wrote a book.
I'd like to not work anymore. What can you do?
I'd like to quit my job. I'm like, oh God. I talked to an author one time, and I don't think we ever sent this person a proposal, just because I was kind of bummed for them. Like, after the call, and this person said to me, this wasn't recently, I think this is maybe last year or something. I'm writing this book so I can quit my job.
No.
I know. And I'm literally like, that is a no-win. First off, you poor thing. Secondly, that's a no-win situation for anybody. And we've actually had authors who have come to us and said, I just quit my job because I want to focus on writing in it. And I want to say, well, I hope you have a few years of savings, because otherwise, right. You know what I mean? Because
old wealthy relative.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I think that it's really about making sure that you are focused not just on having better expectations for your first book, but also using it and thinking about where you're going to be long term.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Because this is going to be your career.
Right. And I love the next, oh, go ahead, Penny. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I love the next bullet that we put on there, mission over hype. I want that on a t-shirt, I think.
Yes.
You know, I was like, that's so perfect. So aligning your message and your brand building with a bigger purpose, like you just said, Penny, this is designed to be, I mean, if you're in this, hopefully you want to be in this for the long term, writing and publishing and marketing a book is not a 6-month hobby.
Right.
I mean, if that's the kind of time you have, I'm jealous. Send me notes. I want to hear your ways. Because that's pretty incredible. But the mission over hype, and it kind of goes back to focusing on the right things, your mission, like, and again, back to what does success really look like for a first book? Honestly, to me, Penny, if an author came to us and ended up in my inbox and sent me a link to their book, like, this is my first one, I don't know what to do next. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen sometimes where I go to their book page and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're doing so many things right. Like the cover's good, the description's compelling. They're using Author Central. They've got a lot of great content on their page. They've got A+ content. They've got a decent number of reviews. They're putting in the work. And typically there's always something else that we can help them with in terms of like getting more creative and broadening, their exposure and their reach and things like that. But I love being able to go back to an author, and they probably don't like it as much, but I love being able to go back to an author and say, you're actually doing really well. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that may not, but it's like reminding them, like, you're doing a good job. You're doing all the right things. This is the kind of base that Penny and I talk about all the time that you need to focus on creating and building off of versus, always thinking about that next thing that's slightly out of reach.
Right, exactly. And I think to that end, though, Amy, I would say that I've also, like, we've had authors where they're just like, oh my gosh, they're so polished and they're so ready to go and they've done all the right things. And yet they still labor under misaligned expectations, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not selling enough. And part of that is also, we've said this before on the show so many times, maybe they sit in writers groups or they're in a Facebook group and some guy just posted, well, I sold 10,000 books like last month or whatever. And then you read that and you think, what kind of a loser am I? I just sold 100, you know what I mean? Like, or whatever the number is. So I also think that a lot of times, and maybe you are selling, a significant number of books, but you don't understand why you're not selling more. A lot of times, like as Amy said, there's maybe one or two things that you're just missing that can really help. But it is a long-term, being a successful author is a long-term commitment. It feels like it shouldn't be, right? It feels like, the whole story about, the famous singer who slept in her van or
right. Yes.
Right? Or the Harry Potter author, I'm so sorry, now I'm totally spacing on her name, who like wrote her book, who was on welfare and she wrote Harry Potter when she was sitting in a coffee shop. Like, I get it. I understand that those stories are alluring and everybody thinks that they are the exception to the rule. No, not everybody, but a lot of times authors think they are the exception to the rule. And what's interesting is Amy, just before the podcast, she went into chat and we were going through this and it was basically a list of media qualifications. And we'll do a show on this later. Not that chat has all the answers, but I'm telling you right now, chat is my boyfriend. Like, how weird is I'm just so and we're going to actually do a show about some cool things that chat can do for you as an author, but came up with a list of like core media standards for qualifying just to be in, just to get on national television and things like that. And none of those included just having a book. Mm-hmm. Like, but at the same time, back to my point, is that a lot of times authors, and again, not everyone, I shouldn't overgeneralize like that, but a lot of times authors really believe that they are the exception to the rule. It's like, well, I listen to Penny and Amy, I get it, but I don't really get it. I'm the exception. This is going to happen for me because everybody loves my book and this is going to be great. And sometimes that happens, but in the majority of cases that you're just going to set yourself up for disappointment. So using your book to, like I just said, build your email list, focus on reader connection, build those relationships with your readers, because your readers are what is going to carry you over the finish line.
Right.
So when an author comes to me and says, what's the ROI from this campaign? Sometimes I'll say to them, like, well, okay, I don't know how you measure the ROI in building readership.
Right.
Because that's really a big, your readers 95% of books are sold word of mouth. And you know, Amy and I have this string going in our personal emails about book recommendations. Like I'm recommending books to her all the time for authors that she's in many cases maybe even never even heard of.
Yep.
You want to build reader connections that you don't even know about, right? That's the whole that you know that is where book one can really help to carry you into book two and three and four. Amy, do you want to talk about the author brand, which again, like we get it, it sounds like a big snooze fest, right? I have my author brand. We've done whole shows on this. So if you just found this show and you're like, oh, Penny and Amy are lecturing me, hopefully that's not your takeaway. But we've done individual shows on reader connections, build your email list, and branding, which Amy's going to talk about. So definitely go back and listen to those.
Yeah, the branding part is huge. The reader connection, the reader experience, those are very much linked,
Yes.
because, and I don't know if we've said this in a while. We used to say it all the time. So clearly, but you remember to also don't just be the author trying to sell something. Remember to also operate as a reader, as a consumer as well. And think about what you go through when you're looking for a book, when you're introduced to a new author. What are the things you look for? What are the things you notice on retail pages? Things like that. Make sure the reader experience, because that is a huge part of your brand, and it's a huge part of what brings people back or keeps them interested enough the first time to actually like recognize that book cover, because they may not buy the first time they're introduced to you, but that recognition, that name recognition, that cover recognition, that experience, the way they felt the first time they got on your retail page and what you had available to them or what you didn't, that's just as big,
Mm-hmm.
So think about that is all part of your brand. Their experience with not only the first, your initial introduction, your first impression, but then are you giving them a reason to come back? And that's a really huge part of this too. And it's this is another thing we say all the time. The more seriously you take yourself, the more seriously potential readers will take you as well,
Right.
So, yeah. And again, like Penny said, we've done lots of shows on this, but it's, nose to tail, like that, having a clean website, making an engaging book description, making sure your cover is exceptional, every single person listening to us can make an exceptional cover. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's something that's available to everybody. And I don't think we talk about that enough, Petty. This is not something that's out of reach for certain authors, but it's about knowing your market, working with the right designers, things like that. And it doesn't even mean spending, taking out a loan or anything just to get a book cover by any means, but it's about educating yourself and making the right decisions. But this is all part of everything's your brand. And so what can you think about what you can do? And most of the things we've been talking about this whole time, other than, the book cover, it's free.
Yeah.
These are all like the crossing your T's and dotting your I's in terms of the first impression that people put out there. So much of what we talk about is free. It just takes time. It takes some self-education. It could be a little less free if you'd like our opinion, because we love helping for things with things like that, but it's the investment in, like Penny said, it's the investment in your long-term potential to convert shoppers to buyers. And it's so much easier to do that correctly at the beginning than it is to have to go back and fix things. Now, if you're past that beginning point, you can still fix things, but we're just letting those, since a lot of what we've been talking about your first book, setting the stage, your expectations for your first book, having realistic goals, things like that. Those are the things you should be focused on with your first book, developing your brand, giving potential readers and buyers something to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what lasts. That's what really lasts. It's not, as nice as it could sound nice and easy, but you really don't want to be the author that gets lucky for a little bit, because that fades,
Yeah.
Having a couple good sale months because, something just went right based on your release, that is not sustainable. That is not going to be something that develops a career, you know. So don't hope you get lucky. Don't hope that you're an exception, like Penny said. Just do the right things, and you'll be totally surprised at how the momentum will continue to build for you if you have a good foundation and
Yeah.
in a strong brand.
Yeah, exactly. And, the good foundation takes time. It's taken time, and I wrote my books in conjunction with starting my business. I mean, the platform stuff takes time, but I promise you it's worth the price of admission. It absolutely is. And I think the final point of what is important, and regardless of where you're at in your writing career, understanding the basics of the publishing industry, and also what book discovery looks like for your readers. And I know that when you think book discovery, well, I could just put it up on Amazon, and I get it, but where do your readers find your books, right? Um, that's something that having a book out there will help you to figure out. And the other thing though too is I'll tell you, if you come away from publishing your first book and promoting your first book and think, here are 5 things that I wish I would have known that I could have done differently, I think that's awesome. Because what that means is you have learned from your mistakes, or you have learned in the process, and maybe not even from mistakes. And now the next book that you do, every single time you are leveling up.
Yep. I love that perspective. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Well,
if you're completely clueless as to why your book hasn't taken off, that's actually a much tougher position to be in.
It's a tougher position to be in. I mean, it's one that Amy and I really love to kind of figure out, because we love to put on our little publishing detective hats and figure out what went wrong. And a lot of times that's fun too, but that's not very fun for you, right?
Right.
It doesn't really empower the author to not know what's wrong. And I think, and even like so I'm doing the Amazon Author Formula Workbook, which is a partner book to the Amazon Author Formula. And even like 24 books out now, I guess this is my 25th. I guess I publish a book a year ever since I've been in business. That's like super weird. But I've learned a lot even from going from that book to this workbook. And part of it is just by nature of creating something that's so granular with worksheets and all this other stuff. Every book, if you can come away with some takeaways, like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have done, then that is a huge win. That is an absolute huge win. So don't beat yourself up if you're one of those authors, because I do talk to authors who say that to me, and they are beating themselves up, and you shouldn't, because that learning experience, man, you cannot buy that learning experience. That's phenomenal. I think, did we cover everything?
Yeah, I think we did. I think I love that we ended this with education though, because yes, we can sit here and remind you of all the things that you should be doing and all the things that you should avoid and the mistakes and stuff like that. And hope you're finding, valuable information here and you're taking notes and whatnot, or re-listening to episodes. But it doesn't completely replace the self-education part, empowering yourself to understand and I think it also helps keep expectations in check, right, Penny? I mean, if you're reading industry newsletters and actively looking for resources on what's going on in publishing, hopefully you're using some of that to also reframe kind of what your plans are, and understanding like, okay, my next book is coming out soon, X number of months out. What can I be doing this time around to be better? I love that you mentioned that, Penny. Like, I challenge everybody to make your list of 5 things that you can do better for your next book. Or if you don't have a new book coming out super soon, what are 5 things you could do differently in the next 3 to 4 months or over the summer? What are some positive changes you can make that reframe what you're focused on and can help contribute to these bigger goals? Like, let's reframe what success is. So let's get those 5 things written down, work to get those done, and 100% call that a major win.
And you know what? I'm actually writing down notes while we're doing this podcast. I'm actually going to put together some social media and maybe even a video or something on reframing success and looking at and like asking authors what are their 5 things. And I also think that as part of education, I think it's also really good to follow other authors in your market because you will learn so much just from like, oh, that's a great idea. And I would say that I want to encourage you, not that any of our listeners would do this, but don't copy, but let it spark ideas. It might spark ideas or in some authors, like there's an author that I follow and I can't think of their name right now, but they really opened up the kimono and they were like, here's what I did leading up to leading up to my first book being published, and here's what the sales were. And it's interesting. I wish that now that I had saved that so we could share it as part of this podcast. This was this author's first book, and they had this crazy launch schedule. Like literally, like I was reading this launch schedule. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so tired right now. And they sold something like 1,000 books in the first month. And you may be listening to this thinking, I'd kill for 1,000 book sales. But when you looked at this list of everything that this author had done, I would have expected that to be 1,000 in the first day. I mean, it was just, So the other piece of it though, too, and I think the final piece, I keep saying that we're at the end of the show and then I keep thinking of stuff, but I think the final piece is that it's great to have an aggressive launch plan. I love that because you want to give your book, it's the long runway of success, right? You want to make sure that you're getting out, promoting your book 6 or 8 months after it's been out because you wanted to just throw the book up on Amazon and see what it was doing, like it would do on its own. Basically, it probably did nothing. But so having a launch plan is a really good idea, but also be mindful that yes, you can create lots of videos. Yes, you can be sending out newsletters. Yes, you can do all those things. And if you have the time to do that, that's great. But initially, you may be speaking to an empty room, or maybe there's just like your mom and a few other people that are listening to you. So it's great to have that content. And I don't want to discourage you from doing that, but don't think that just because you have a super aggressive launch plan that all of a sudden everything is going to go viral and you're going to be an overnight success. And then you're going to write to Amy and go, neener, neener, neener. Look at how success. Like you guys are wrong on your podcast. Look at now I'm doing the voice, right?
It's contagious. Sorry.
It's so contagious. But I mean, it's great to do all this stuff. I love authors that do all the things. Just make sure that your expectations aren't for instant fame, because nobody is born famous. And with that, we're going to have a lot of, during the rollout of the pre-order for the Amazon Author Formula workbook, we're going to have a lot of really fun stuff. So be on the lookout for that. If you follow us on social media, definitely be on the lookout for that. Thank you so much for listening. If this is your first listen and we didn't totally discourage you with our reality check podcast, be sure to follow us. We drop a show every Friday. We would love to have you as a ongoing listener. To those of you who have followed us and listened, we get emails all the time from authors like, I'm binging all the shows. I love all the shows. Thank you so much. It means the world to us. We also love reviews wherever you listen to podcasts. Please leave one. Yeah. or email us. Email us the review. If it's, sometimes I know Apple doesn't always make it easy to leave reviews. So thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.